All right, hello everyone. Welcome back. So just as kind of a quick recap, what we've done so far in this section is we've done hypothesis testing when we have one categorical variable that we're interested in. So we did the first one proportion hypothesis test when that variable just had two levels, and then we did the chi-square goodness of fit test if that variable had more than two levels. Now we're going to move into doing a hypothesis test for when we have two categorical variables of interest. And so this will be the last topic of this section before we move on to what will really be the last topic of the entire semester, which will be an introduction to modeling. So we actually saw this example at the very beginning of the semester. This was kind of like our first kind of introductory example where we had this experiment where researchers randomly assigned names to resumes, and each name was associated with a particular race and gender. And the researchers found that association through a separate study entirely. And so after this random assignment of resumes, they sent out these resumes to some employers and recorded whether or not the resume received a callback. So they provided a fake phone number. If that fake phone number got a callback from the employer, then this received callback would be a 1 to indicate that that resume did get a callback, and a 0 to indicate that that resume did not get a callback. So this is just the first 6 observations in the data set. We see that the first 6 resumes, none of them got a callback, and then we see the race and gender of each name on that resume that was typically associated with that name. Okay, and so before we kind of looked at this data with a side-by-side bar chart, and we kind of tried to look at it a bit intuitively, but now we have the tools, or we will soon have the tools, to actually formally analyze this with a statistical hypothesis test. And so we're going to use our kind of 4 steps that we've been using to kind of have a similar structure. And we're going to start by just preparing and kind of exploring the data a bit. And so the first thing we might want to do is fill in the row and column totals so that we have these for later. And so you could use a calculator if you want, or do it in your head and hope there's not any mistakes. Okay. So now we've got our table of counts, we've got our totals, and so let's go ahead and answer some of these kind of preliminary questions. And so now for the first time, instead of having one variable of interest, we actually have 2. And so we're going to ignore gender for now, and you can analyze that as practice at the end if you want. But for now, we want to just see if there's an association between race and receiving a callback. And so our 2 variables are received callback, and that one is categorical, and race, which is also categorical. As we mentioned before, a useful graph to kind of visualize this data would be a side-by-side bar chart. And so we could go ahead and do that. I will put race on the x-axis. And then do my best to just do a little sketch of... So this is supposed to go up to 2200 to correspond with the no category, and this is 235. All right, and the black applicants are similar. but from the raw data received fewer callbacks and have a few more no callbacks. And so now, instead of just looking at this graph and making a judgment call, we're going to proceed with a formal hypothesis test to see how much evidence there is that these two variables, receiving a callback and race, are actually associated. Our other prepare steps including writing out the parameters of interest, and we're just going to make a note here that this actually usually isn't done with the chi-square test of association. You can, so you could write out like the proportion of white applicants who received a callback and the proportion of black applicants who received a callback, and it's really not too bad in this example, but you could have many different levels for either of these variables, and then it just becomes kind of a mess. We could also calculate some proportions, so the proportion of white applicants who receive a callback and the proportion of black applicants who receive a callback. So I'm just going to note a W for white and a B for black. And it looks like for white applicants, it's 235 divided by 2,435. Whoops. And then for the black applicants, it's 157 divided by 2,435. And so you could go ahead and calculate those out. And so, let's see. So it looks like about 10% of the white applicants received a callback, and then about 6 or 7% of the black applicants in this sample received a callback. And so again, the point with this hypothesis test is that we all might be different in our judgment about whether these proportions are different. A hypothesis test is a slightly more objective way to say how much evidence we have that these proportions are actually different, or that there's an association between race and receiving a callback. And so to set up our hypotheses, we could go ahead and write out these null and alternative hypotheses in words. And so again, with this chi-square test of association, it's usually easier to just use words instead of symbols. And so our null hypothesis is that there's no association between race and receiving a callback. The alternative, as you might guess, is that there is an association. Between race and receiving a callback. So this kind of goes way back to when we started talking about null hypotheses. We said that they were usually going to be a statement of equality, which is what we've dealt with before, or of no association if there's more than one variable of interest, which is what we're dealing with now. All right, and so just to kind of make a note that these sample proportions, we've actually already calculated them above. And so the sample proportions are nice just as a descriptive statistic of our data, but we won't actually end up using them directly in the calculations for our test. Okay. So now we've kind of set up this hypothesis test. These are the hypotheses that we're testing. We want to know how much evidence there is of an association between race and receiving a callback based on our sample data. And we'll move into that question next.